Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Councillor Marcus Andrews, Chairman of Audit and Governance Committee. Welcome to our meeting on Thursday, the 25th of July 2024. I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. Without any further ado, can I pass over to Democratic Services Officer to read out the housekeeping announcements? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point in the front of the car park. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point in the front car park of this building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on your laptops. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Moving to item 1, apologies. Have we got any apologies for the meeting this evening?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just for information, Councillor Herriot is no longer a member of this committee due to him becoming a cabinet member. He has been replaced by Councillor Slade. So apologies have been received from Councillors Castle and Slade and also Samantha Acton. We also have received apologies from the portfolio holder, Councillor Cox.
Okay, thank you for that. I've just received an email from my Vice Chairman, Councillor Eleanor Connery, that due to traffic delays, everything like that, she'll be attending the meeting remotely. And one of the other committee members, Councillor Mike Tarling, I know he's also was delayed in traffic, has now arrived and will be joining the meeting. As regards the other independent member of this committee, I believe that she's also joining the meeting remotely, Lindy Jensen van Vuren, and others, a couple other people like the Chief Executive is joining us via Teams as well. In terms of substitute members, have we got any substitute members?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Trent has been appointed as a substitute for Councillor Slade.
Thank you. Also, declarations of interest. Have any declarations of interest been received?
No, none received, Chair.
Thank you for that. Next item is confirmation of minutes. Our last meeting was on the 30th of May, and the minutes have been circulated with the agenda, and I now seek the approval so that I can sign those minutes as a true record of our last meeting. Can I have any proposal to accept the minutes? Councillor Caraway and Councillor Tarling is seconding it, so I will initial and sign those during the meeting, so that's done. Thank you. Moving on, public issues. Have any questions, statements or petitions been received? I believe there are some questions.
Yes, Chair. There are 4 public questions and 4 public statements.
Thank you. Dealing with the public questions, there are 3 from Mr. Redman, all in relation to item agenda 12. Mr. Redman isn't attending the meeting, so the Democratic Services Officer will read out the questions, and one by one I will read out the replies. So can we deal with the first question, please?
Yes, certainly, Chair. Question relating to breaches of financial regulations. What arrangements were in place to detect instances of non-compliance?
There is a three-line defence detection system that applies. The first line, service directors and managers are responsible for reporting all known or discovered breaches of the financial regulations to the CFO as soon as they become aware of such instances. Service directors may be required to supplement the CFO's annual report on breaches to the Audit and Governance Committee with a more detailed report explaining the circumstances of the breach and the remedial action taken or planned by way of remedy. The second line, the Strategic Procurement Team, SPT, may become aware, as the Council Centre of Expertise, of breaches and will liaise with the service directors to ensure breaches are reported. The third line, the internal audit identify and report breaches through the course of their work. Breaches of financial regulations are reported in the financial year they are found and reported to A&G committee in that year. And the second question, please.
Thank you, Chair. Question 2, procurement decision records, PDRs. When should a procurement decision record get approved by strategic procurement and CFO, before or after the purchase has been made?
Fundamentally, procurement decision records, PDRs, are approved before progressing beyond defined decision points. The decision to award a contract or issue a purchase order is an example. Additionally, for more complex and significant procurements, there are further controlled gateway decisions at define and procure. The define decision ensures that forecast benefits justify the investment of time, and the procure decision sense checks that we are fully prepared to issue tender invitations. However, it may be necessary to purchase some goods or services in an emergency, and that may mean the procurement decision record has to be approved after the purchase has been made. These would be the exception rather than the rule. And the third question from Mr. Redmond, please.
Yes, as mentioned in a previous A&G meeting, on what date will the Council start publishing PDRs? Will this be on BCP's website, and will this be before or after they have been approved?
The Council takes its commitment to being open and transparent to the public very seriously. At the same time, the Council also considers factors such as legislative or statutory requirements and resource required to redact sensitive or personal information. There is no requirement or intention to start publishing procurement decision records. PDRs are a part of an internal control process. PDRs include commercially sensitive information. Instead, all records of contracts awarded by the Council can be found on the Contracts Register, available on the BCP Council website, and which must be published. And there is one public question for this meeting from Mr. McKinstry in relation to agenda item 6. Mr. McKinstry, if you could join us at the table, you can then ask your question and I will respond. Over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, Councillor Andrews. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Finch. Okay, regarding the external auditor's concerns about future places, can the Chair explain why I was not provided with that company's monthly management accounts during the recent statutory inspection? Indeed, I was not provided with any records I requested, despite the assertion in tonight's draft minutes. The finance team will look to respond as timely as possible to requests. As this is a statutory breach, and as a similar breach occurred in 2022, I have asked the external auditor to consider issuing a public interest report. Can you also confirm the start and end dates for which management accounts were forwarded by Future Places to the Council, including the dates of any hiatuses? The accounts were meant to be forwarded monthly under Article 3, Sub-Article 1, Sub-Article 1 of the Shareholders' Agreement, but as the external auditor notes at page 50 of tonight's report, the company was acting in breach of that agreement.
Thank you for your question. A response to Mr. McKinstry's queries will be sent in due course, answering the queries in full. However, in response to the specific question about Future Places Limited, As per the National Audit Office guidance, which covers the rights of the public under Local Audit and Accountability Act 2014, to quote, your inspection must be about the accounts or relate to an item in the accounts, end of quote. Future Places Limited, as a subsidiary of BCP Council, has never been included in any of its published draft and audited statement of accounts. The company is not consolidated as part of the Council's group accounts on the basis of being immaterial. We are unable to ascertain specifics in regard to the management accounts question, as all the staff in the process have since left the Council and the company. And that's the end of the public questions. There are some public statements, and indeed they are three to be read up by Mr. McKinstry. Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to ask if we could be copied into, as members of this committee, whatever that further email is from the council back to Mr. McKinstry, just for information, please, Chairman.
Point taken. If that could be noted, please, and the officer will note that as well. Thank you for raising that. So, public statements. There are three public statements from Mr. McKinstry. If you could read out your statement number 1, please.
The report for item 14, paragraph 23, page 237, lists several governance issues which, while serious, aren't sufficient to feature in the draft annual governance statement. I contacted the internal auditor suggesting some additional issues. These mostly concern the councillor's code of conduct. I have some bullet points, therefore. Lack of penalty for breaching the code or disregarding sanctions. No mechanism for removing errant or non-compliant councillors from committees. Outcome letters sent to complainants marked private and confidential, which is not a constitutional requirement and breaches Nolan principles, brackets, openness, accountability, close brackets. An independent person on the Standards Committee receiving a publicly funded allowance hasn't attended a meeting for 2 years. It's possible these matters are being pursued by the Constitution Review Working Group, since the Standards Committee itself heard on the 16th of January how its processes are ripe for review. Given the resurgence in councillors' complaints alluded to elsewhere in paragraph 23, I hope any such review will shortly fructify. The most alarming aspect of paragraph 23 is the inclusion of corporate complaints and information governance as a concern. In other words, actual governance processes have degraded to the point where they've become potential governance issues. What is the wider human cost here? My own experience involves complaints about FOIs going astray, but presumably more consequential complaints are also being lost or delayed or unanswered. The plan for a centralised complaints management process, paragraph 26, is clearly timely, but how can this function optimally if the same officers as those involved in the current system are manning the pumps? As Juvenal put it, quis custodiet ipsos custodes, who guards the guards themselves? Hopefully this committee, along with civic-minded residents, will be keeping a watching brief. Finally, I am convinced that this council's governance has improved vastly. That, however, understates just how dysfunctional governance was around 2022, and I well remember a resident challenging that year's annual governance statement, citing the abolition of the Overview and Scrutiny Board, the use of whips and cabinet assistants in scrutiny, political imbalances, etc., etc. Those concerns were dismissed as personal or political preferences by this committee on the 12th of January 2023. That same week, the then leader ventured a budget amendment so unorthodox that it led to external auditor involvement, while the informal cabinet explored a plot to rig the 2023 local elections. A few months later, an internal review found grave deficiencies in the council's governance arrangements, and this was followed by the best value notice. The perturbations and forebodings voiced by that resident in 2023 were entirely justified, therefore. I wanted to put that on the public record.
Thank you, sir. Your three statements were obviously all rolled into one, and I'll let you adjourn to the public gallery, and we'll move on to the next item. The next item is one public statement from Mr. Gattrell relating to agenda items 4, 14 and 15. Mr. Gattrell is not attending the meeting, so his statement will now be read out by the Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, Chair. Unresolved committee issues, including the following: the 150 words limit entails established abbreviations, deficient fixed asset records. Over several years, I have notified senior officers concerning this incontrovertible breach of the 2015 regulations. The related obligatory 1989 Act Section 5 monitoring officer report to all members remains uncirculated. Members are not empowered to waive reporting which does not expire through delay. Unresponded local electors' annual accounting information requests. In 2023, I notified officers concerning this contravention of the 2015 regulations. It is also being contrary to the cited 2021 Moss case decision. The matter, however, was first permitted committee issue awareness on 30th of May 2024. Responses to the recent 2023-24 process are outstanding. Again, negating electors' time limit, 2014 Act Section 26, rights and assured interactions with the external auditor, including Section 27. This obligates 1989 Act monitoring officer reporting to members and additions to the 2022-23 and 2023-24 draft annual governance statements.
Thank you for that. And the text of those questions and answers and statements will appear in the published minutes in due course. That concludes questions and statements. There are no petitions. Moving on to item 6, external auditor, auditor's annual report 2023, 2024, value for money arrangements report. I think we have Mr. Peter Barber with us from Grant Thornton, the external auditor. So without any further ado, Mr. Barber, can I pass over to you to present your report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee. So can I just check you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep, great. Okay, so before I start, just to remind members of the committee that our role is twofold. We give an opinion on your financial statements and we assess your arrangements for delivering value for money in the use of your resources. And this report is our interim auditor's annual report for 23-24, and it focuses on the latter of those two responsibilities, the VFM. And when I present it, I will refer to the page numbers on the left-hand side, the big ones within your pack. So this report starts on page 25 and sets out our judgment in respect to our considerations as to whether, in our view, the council has put proper arrangements in place to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness. I'm joined today on the call via Teams by my colleague Alexa Ngini, who is part of our local government advisory team and the main author of this report, and I will ask her to talk you through some of the details shortly. But before I do, I just wanted to make a few observations. Firstly, as has been the case for a number of years at BCP, this is a very detailed report, and we make no apologies for that. A, it reflects the requirements of the NAO code that requires us to report in more detail, and B, it reflects the level of coverage required at BCP given some of the prior year findings. It is also important to state that this is an interim report. That our VFM work is concluded at this point, but will only be finalised once our other responsibilities are concluded, and that includes the opinion audit, which is progressing well, and any other audit responsibilities, such as considering objections, should that be appropriate. For the longer standing members of this committee, I think I explained this when I presented the prior year VFM report, but VFM means lots of things to lots of people, but for us as external auditors, it's based on the NAO code and requires us to look at three areas. You have financial sustainability, governance, and the third area the three E's, improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And having looked at each of those areas, we are then required to make judgments, and if weaknesses are identified, that then can result in recommendations. And there are different levels of recommendations, and they are set out right at the end of the report. And I'm just going to check the page on Appendix B, page 80. So within page 80 of your report, you have the different types of recommendations that can arise. The most serious type of recommendation is what we call a statutory recommendation, and we reserve these for the most serious concerns over arrangements at an audited body. Pleasing to be able to report that we aren't issuing any statutory recommendations in respect to 23-24. These do tend to be the nuclear option and are rare, but they are not unheard of, and are actually becoming much more prevalent within the public sector. You'll be aware of examples if you've seen it in the press in relation to Slough, in relation to financial capacity and reserves. We have one in Samwell, which was in relation to a breakdown in relationships between members and senior officers. Warrington was another one, and probably the most high profile one more recently has been Birmingham. So we don't have any of those. The next level down in terms of recommendations are key recommendations, and these arise when on balance we don't think the council has effective arrangements in place in one or more of the VFM areas. You have had a number of these for a number of years, and you continue to have a number of key recommendations being made in this report, and they are across the area of financial sustainability in the three E's. I suppose obviously the important thing to highlight here is that there are no key recommendations in this year in the area of governance, which reflects a real improvement on what we've seen in prior years. And I'll talk to you a bit more about that in a minute in terms of what's improved in that particular area. But I do think the council are to be commended on this. And it really is about ensuring that decisions are made on complete, accurate and timely information. And I think you can take some comfort from that there isn't what we were seeing in prior years in terms of high risk decisions taken in an ill-informed way without due consideration and due diligence. If we take the financial sustainability area, whilst there are still significant weaknesses identified here, one of the areas that we have removed from the prior year is in relation to the transformation programme, where we had concerns last year about the reporting of what was set out to be achieved at the beginning of the year, monitoring it and actually assessing whether you delivered against the business plan objectives. We've seen a significant improvement in the reporting of that. It's much more transparent and open and gives the reader and decision makers a much clearer feel for whether that is delivering against expectations. We've also seen that you've delivered to budget in 23-24, and we've noticed that the position, while still challenging, is improving and stabilising. You had a big savings plan to deliver in 23-24, and you delivered the majority of that. 24-25 is also a very big ask, with significant savings again, and continued use of things like capital flexibilities to deliver the position. But ultimately, there is some light at the end of the tunnel there, and I know that in the medium term financial plan, the level of savings required into the medium term is significantly less, and indicative that you might be getting back to an annual budget cycle that doesn't contain an inherent deficit. And then if we look at the final area of the three E's, you'll be aware that for a number of years now we've had issues around children's services. That's well rehearsed. It's reflects the Ofsted inadequate rating. No doubt Alexa will say a bit more about that shortly, but clearly we are seeing positive signs in there as well. But you remain inadequate, and that's been raised. But we've also included this year a particular separate recommendation in relation to SEND, but also importantly, as I alluded to earlier, one of the recommendations we had, key recommendations in the prior year in relation to that decision-making process has been removed, given my observations earlier. So I've probably gone on a bit too long and stolen too much of Alexa's thunder, but I will hand over to Alexa, who I'll ask to elaborate further where appropriate. Alexa.
I just check everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, brilliant. So Pete's kind of given the introduction, but if we start off with the financial sustainability. So this primarily focuses on
Sorry, we've lost.
Can you hear me
The
now?
signal's breaking up a bit. You may want to turn off your camera a little
Sorry.
bit. Yeah.
Let me try to turn off my camera and then let me know if that helps. Does that help?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. So we had identified previously 2 significant weaknesses which had given rise to key recommendations. One, as Pete mentioned, was related to the transformation programme, and we are pleased to note that the council made significant progress in this area, and we are able to close down this key recommendation and no longer consider that to be an area of significant weakness. We had a second significant weakness in our prior year report in relation to the medium-term financial plan. We would also like to note that the council has made significant progress in this area over the last 12 months, and we wanted that to be mentioned, and it is commendable. However, we still do have concerns over the medium-term position. The council's reserves are the lowest that they've ever been since it was established as a unitary authority, and whilst the unearmarked reserves balance is above that 5% net revenue expenditure mark that originally came from the Audit Commission, but has now, I think, been taken on by SIPFA as a sort of prudent measure of a unearmarked reserves balance. The financial resilience earmarked reserves which the council had set aside to manage budget pressures has now been fully depleted. And the level of reserves for 24-25 is unprecedented for the council. It is a massive amount, which obviously carries a significant amount of risk, because if any of those savings are not delivered, that puts additional pressures on the reserves balance. So that is just an area of risk. And our key recommendation for that area from the prior year will remain outstanding. We are now reporting 2 new significant weaknesses in the financial sustainability area. The first significant weakness is in regard to the dedicated schools grant deficit. For the benefit of members, the dedicated schools grants is a ring-fenced grant in relation to the schools balance. And this is an area that a lot of local authorities are seeing quite a lot of pressure on, particularly on the high needs block. And this is in relation to children who are dependent on the SEND provision. And the council is experiencing problems that are very similar to many other local authorities to do with demand pressures. And in this regard, the council has been unable to secure an agreement with the DfE for the safety valve mechanism, which is the mechanism which is for the councils with the highest DSG deficits to be able to systematically reduce that deficit over a period of time. In this sense, as your Section 151 officer, I'm sure, has kept you up to date on, the DSG deficit is currently being protected by something called statutory override, which allows it not to be on the general fund balance. When this override elapses, the council will have to assume, well, we assume once it elapses, if it's not extended by the government, the council have to assume this balance itself, and at that point would become technically insolvent. So this is one of the areas that we've raised a significant weakness. The second significant weakness also is being primarily driven by the DSG, but relates to what the DSG deficit is doing to the council's cash position. The council is currently having to service the DSG deficit via its internal resources, and the DSG deficit is so extensive that the cash position is not going to be enough to continue to service that DSG position even before the statutory override elapses. The Section 151 officer has highlighted this in the reports to this committee and to other committees I'm aware of. So in this sense, the council is running out of options in terms of what it is able to use for cash. So due to this financial cash emergency, we've also raised a significant weakness on financial sustainability. I'll just move on to governance. So we had raised a previous significant weakness, and as Pete mentioned, we are pleased to note that this position is can now be closed, and this is no longer considered to be an area where we consider the council to have significant weaknesses. The council had previously been entering into sort of high risk, ambitious, challenging projects without proper due diligence and consideration of governance, and we do not feel that that is continuing to happen at present. We do, however, obviously acknowledge that there was a best value notice issued in August 23, which mentioned key governance concerns, but we are confident in the council's action plan that is being pursued to remedy these recommendations, and however, we do await the conclusion that MHCLG will come to when they review the council's action plan in August 2024. We also find that there are effective risk management arrangements in place and effective internal audit arrangements in place. In terms of what we call the 3 E's, so improving economy and efficiency and effectiveness, in the prior year, we'd had 2 significant weaknesses in this area. We note that the council has made significant progress in implementing robust decision-making processes for decisions, and this was primarily into some of the arrangements in place for BCP Future Places Limited. The council has now obviously changed the operating model, and BCP Future Places is due to come in-house. There have also been decisive changes to the arrangements surrounding the transformation program. These have obviously have been significant, and we consider this key recommendation to be addressed. The second area of significant weakness that we'd raised in the prior was in relation to children's services. So the council has obviously was issued with an inadequate rating from Ofsted a while ago, and this resulted in them being in intervention. And now, as I'm sure you're aware, you have the DfE Improvement Advisor in, and the council remains in intervention from the DfE. We consider this to be tantamount to a significant weakness in arrangements, but we wanted to recognise that the council has made significant progress in this area, and through our review, we noted, and we hope it's reflected in the report for members, but we noted that there had been a significant amount of error in this, and the Children's Services Improvement Plan had been progressed significantly. I also wanted to note that our conversations with the DfE Improvement Advisor were generally positive, and he is generally positive about the direction of travel for the council in children's. However, this obviously remains up to Ofsted's next view at the next inspection. So we continue to have a significant weakness in this area, and that key recommendation remains outstanding. In the area of SEND, the council received a statutory direction in February 2024 relating to a monitoring visit from July 23 in respect to special educational needs and disabilities. The DfE Improvement Advisor has now had his powers extended to cover SEND, and we consider this to be a significant weakness in arrangements. We are also, however, would like to note that there's always a bit of a lag between the actual monitoring visit and then when the statutory direction comes in. So it's worth noting that while it happened in February 24, the councils, as soon as that inspection happened, made significant progress, and this was acknowledged by the DfE Improvement Advisor. And it is worth noting that while the statutory direction is on the council, the weaknesses of partners can also play a huge part in this in terms of the schools and the NHS. And so it's one of those situations where, while it might look that the council is not performing very well, it is worth acknowledging that there are also sort of these external factors which can really affect the council's ability to perform. And the DfE doesn't have direction powers on partners. So it is one of those situations where that does need to be acknowledged in terms of viewing the council's role. And for this, we found there to be a significant weakness in arrangements and have raised a key recommendation. In terms of the other areas in relation to 3Es, we felt that everything didn't demonstrate a significant weakness, and we have just raised some improvement recommendations, but we are generally satisfied with the council's arrangements with performance management and data quality, and there's been a lot of improvement. The new procurement function is doing well, and partnership arrangements outside of the ones mentioned and said appear to be functioning effectively. I think that's everything from me. Hopefully you got all of that. Sorry about the connection.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for your presentation. I've got, though Councillor Mike Cox, the portfolio holder for finance, can't be here this evening, I've got a written comments or statements that he's asked me to read out on his behalf to Grant Thornton and to obviously yourselves, the people on the committee. So I will do that. I welcome this report and thank the auditors for their diligence with the support of the council officers in making sure this gets to the council in good time. There are a few areas I would like to highlight as follows. 1. The external auditor has recognised the improvement and the turnaround which has been achieved in the last year in terms of governance. In particular, they have noted a clear change in approach and a return to traditional and conventional decision making, avoiding high risk projects. That they believe there is evidence of significant progress and consequently turn the corner to have effective governance with no significant weaknesses. 2. In terms of financial sustainability, the auditor has noted good progress, particularly around adopting conventional budget setting processes and removing one significant area of weakness. However, the well-documented problem of the DSG, which affects many upper tier authorities, not only remains, but is getting worse. I can only concur with the auditor's judgment on this and trust a solution is found imminently. BCP has to date been spearheading efforts to resolve this problem. 3. Regarding improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness, I welcome the auditor's commendation for the efforts made in this area regarding the transformation and the impact of closure of BCP Future Places Limited. It is a shame, though, that due to the ongoing Ofsted rating and the recent statutory direction in respect of SEND services, they are unable currently to reflect the enormous improvements in his overall assessment. And that concludes Mike Cox's statement. Before I open it up to questions and comments from the floor, I just wonder, Mr. Stallard, do you have any comments to make about this or observations? Or Mr. Richards?
Not at this stage, thank you.
Fine, thank you. Any comments or observations from committee? Councillor Tarling, you indicated first.
Yeah, thank you. It was just a bit of clarification, I think, from Alexa. Is it Ngini? Sorry, apologies if I mispronounced your surname. You just made a comment regarding the DFE advisor remit was extended to cover SEND, and it was identified as a weakness. Why is that a weakness, if I may ask?
The management of SEND?
Yeah, why is the extension of the DFE advisor to cover SEND a weakness?
So it's not a weakness. So a weakness had been identified in SEND, and I guess the option is, the reason why I stated that was because the DFE could send an additional improvement advisor, but their view was that that role would be more adequately sort of carried out by a pre-existing DFE improvement advisor that was there for children's services.
Thank you. That clears it up. Thank you very much.
Yes, Councillor Sarah Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a couple of points, actually. Firstly, thank you, Alexa, and your team for providing such a comprehensive report. The points that I'm going to mention, I don't think they're really questions. I think they're more about just keeping them on our agenda as a committee. So the first one is noting data quality. And just really, I'm still not seeing sort of the amalgamated corporate risk log, which I know we've discussed in the previous committee meetings. So I would like to see that, and also to see more on the KPI dashboards to really help councillors in terms of decision making. So I think that's still an area for development. I'd also like to know about the review of partnership arrangements. Just where we're at with that, really, and again, so that stays on our agenda and that doesn't get lost. And finally, just a point about the financial sustainability in terms of direction of travel. It's really helpful being able to see the arrows next to and the RAG rating as well. So it would also be helpful just to have a bit more of a comparison, seeing previous years, but also seeing forecasts in terms of where are we seeing the direction of travel going. Thank you.
Any comments from Grant Thornton or no? I've got a question actually. Perhaps Mr. Barber can answer. In the report, page 23, paragraph 9, obviously you talk about the proposed application of the backstop for the 2022-23 accounts. Obviously, we're talking about the following year's accounts, the current accounts. What is the situation with the 2022-23 accounts? Has that now run its course? You know, the abbreviated accounts are concluded. What is the position?
So Chair, the backstop proposals were put on hold following the snap election. There wasn't sufficient time to put them through primary legislation and have that approved. So the anticipation is that will now be done by the new government, and we are awaiting confirmation of the timing of that. The initial proposals were that the backstop would be effective from the end of September 2024. We are now anticipating that it may move to the end of December, possibly the end of January. In further discussions with the Section 151 officer, we believe that doesn't and wouldn't be the most sensible approach to seek to complete a 22-23 audit. We think the preferable way forward, as discussed at previous meetings of this committee, is to backstop the 22-23 audit and make an early start on 23-24. And as I alluded to in my introduction, the 23-24 audit is underway. The council produced its accounts in accordance with the earlier deadline of the end of May. And not all of my audits did deliver to that really stretching timeline. We commenced the audit in late June, and we are well progressed. So that puts us in a really good position. But ultimately, we cannot conclude 22-23 until that backstop legislation has been approved. But ultimately, it will mean that the accounts that are available unaudited on the website at the moment, all I would be doing is issuing a disclaimer opinion to say that I've not undertaken any work to gain assurance over the disclosures within that financial year's accounts. And inevitably, and we await the guidance as part of the backstop guidance, that will necessitate a little bit extra work around the opening balances, given that those would have not been subject to audit. So there would be some additional audit procedures, we suspect, but until the guidance comes out, we can't categorically say how involved that is.
Okay, thank you for that. Obviously, we've got a few more meetings before the end of the year, so perhaps either yourself, you are joining us, or the officers could update you or update us as when that legislation goes through. Councillor Tarling?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's alluded to in some of the high risk items, and something Councillor Armstrong's just said about direction of travel. On page 14 of your report, page 38 of our papers, where we've got the 24-25 budget and the medium term, it makes mention of the unearmarked reserves and plans to increase the earmarked reserves by 5.4 million a year. Is that still, and this is aimed probably more at Mr. Richards, is this actually on track to realise these savings and to build up the reserves? I didn't hear anything of how we're going to get back from where we are. I appreciate in the same breath as comment about the cash situation, which is highly worrying. And yeah, I think we all recognise that reserves over the last few years were run down to a point where, you know, we are in a very serious position. But the point of having a medium-term plan is to look beyond the short-term cash issue. Is that still on track in light of the cash issue that we're now presented? Well, not now presented, we knew was coming, but has now been raised. Thank you.
Mr. Richards?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The table on page 38 sets out the council's actual reserve position as at the 31st of March 2024, based on its final accounts for the financial year 23-24. That financial outturn went through Cabinet last week, and they have agreed that position. So, our reserves, we have managed to improve the unearmarked reserves to £26.1 million. That leaves them at around about 7.6 of our net revenue expenditure, which is above the previous referenced 5% SIP benchmark, and actually starts to move us not into the upper quartile, but not far off that upper quartile by way of a process. And I think the council's financial strategy continues to be to take all means possible to increase them even further, if we can. So that is the position with regards to our earmarked reserves. That financial outturn report that went to Cabinet last week will provide a lot more detail behind how we arrived at those positions.
Okay. Do you want to come back now?
So you just for my very simple non-financial brain, that means that the direction of travel, to quote Councillor Armstrong there, is positive. I know obviously we're still in a very, very perilous position cash-wise, but it is getting better.
I think, as you've heard from the external auditor and as referenced by the financial outturn for last year, we're doing everything we can to improve the overall position of the authority and to improve that financial resilience. But as the auditor has quite rightly alluded to, the big elephant in the room is the DSG deficit. And until we've got a resolution to that, we run incredible risks with regards to the ability to set a 25-26 budget. So that's why, as was referenced in the financial MTFP update report to Cabinet last week, I've written to Department 11 and Up, Housing and Communities, the leader, the previous leader, based on the motion that went to Council in January or February, has written to various departments. Chief Exec has followed it up by various communications to various government departments. So we're keeping that pressure on government to try and come to a early resolution on this, so that we can then plan, for a balanced budget in 25-26, knowing how we are going to resolve that cash flow issue.
Councillor Kerr-Waite.
My question is probably also for Adam, because I'm just sort of thinking back to when we did some debt restructuring to sort of improve our initial we're sort of reducing some expenditure on debt, and that was going to sort of improve our position. And I don't really remember it coming up about this financial resilience reserve. Maybe it did, maybe I'm sort of missed it and don't understand. But I mean, I remember sort of the focus was on this getting back up to the 5% of net revenue expenditure, and that's up at 7.6. So I don't understand why there's a concern about the financial resilience reserve. I don't really know what the difference is between the financial resilience reserve and general unarmed. If reserves are unearmarked, aren't they for financial resilience, or why are they different things?
So when the 23-24 budget was set, the original budget for 23-24, the administration at the time underpinned that budget by the use of £30 million worth of reserves. Those reserves were the financial resilience reserve. So that was money that had been, if you like, specifically set aside to support the setting of that budget by that £30 million. So that's the references to the financial resilience reserve. It was used up as part of that year's budget.
How? Sorry, how was it used up?
Well, what it meant is that year we set expenditure £30 million higher than we could afford without the use of those reserves. Okay. So we used that reserve money to balance income and expenditure, if you like, as part of that process.
So, for example, would that be, we've projected that we're going to make savings of this, that, and the other, but not all of them happen straight away. Therefore, we cut into our wiggle room a bit. Is that right?
In the budget for 23-24, the expenditure that the administration says, as I said, was £30 million more than we had, if you like, available from normal sources of income expenditure. So we used £30 million of reserves to balance that budget. In setting the 24-25 budget, what we recognised is that had caused a structural deficit because it's only one-off. You can only apply one-off. So we had to address that underlying £30 million gap, and that's why we set a £38 million, if you like, savings target for 24-25, because we had to address that underlying deficit.
So does that mean that we were sort of 30 million short last year, but we're not expecting that in future if the savings transpire?
Yeah, if the savings that we plan for 24-25 are delivered, then we have a balanced medium-term financial plan. That's assuming that all the other assumptions in that plan go according to plan. And the MTFE update report to Cabinet last week did what we call sensitivity analysis. Started to play with, well, what if we can't put council tax up by what we previously assumed? What if the pay award is more? So to start some financial planning around what those scenarios might look like, so we can start to develop strategies that, should any of those come to pass, we've got plans available that we can draw down to help maintain that balanced budget position.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. We've got Councillor Eleanor Connolly joining us remotely in our team. So, Eleanor, can you ask your question or make your statement?
Yes, can you hear me? And apologies for not being in the room. Two quick questions. One of them on the safety valve. In the report, you express your disappointment that the Department for Education rejected the proposal put forward. From your perspective as the external auditor, did you disagree, or were you disappointed with BCP's proposal put to DFE, or are you just expressing disappointment that they didn't take it on board?
We're not expressing any judgment on the council's negotiations with the DFE, because that would be outside the scope of our role as the external auditor. But what we're stating is that we're disappointed that the council was not able to secure a deal with the DFE. We haven't reviewed any of the council's proposals to the DFE. We just know that they have not been able to secure a safety valve agreement with the DFE, and that's what leaves the council without that medium-term secure plan to manage that DSG deficit should the statutory override elapse on the 31st of March 26.
That's helpful, thank you. And I suppose if it had been agreed and went ahead, then in the scope of the next report, you might reflect on whether you agreed with the timetable for reduction in spending that was part of that proposal.
It would just add a layer of assurance. It would add a layer of assurance, as opposed to it wouldn't be within our typical value for money review arrangements for us to be reviewing the report that's sent to the DFE, or the proposal sent to the DFE regarding the safety valve agreement. But what we would review there is the layers of assurance, effectively. So when we see councils with a safety valve agreement, that shows an agreement with the DFE that you have a plan in place to reduce that deficit, and also you're then within a sort of controlled arrangement. Should the statutory override elapse, there might be, we don't know what the implications of that are going to be, but at the moment the council doesn't have that secure arrangement in place.
My understanding, maybe this one for Adam as well, is my understanding is that the council plans to go ahead with the proposed deficit reduction anyway, from BCP's perspective, regardless of the agreement with the Department for Education. Is that something? Would you have an opinion on that as part of your audit?
So maybe through you, Chair, if I may. So the decision to the inability to reach an agreement. That, I mean, clearly, if the department is asking you to do things you don't think is achievable, then it is proper, isn't it, that you actually say, that you don't think that's deliverable, and then you enter into a negotiation. And if you can't reach an agreement, then you don't. I mean, what we would say is that we see some councils that haven't reached agreement, others that have. We do recognise that where you do, and you do secure it, that we are seeing improvements in the position at other councils. But we don't know what, because it's early, there's various phases, but we haven't seen as yet ramifications if they're improving but not at the speed, and how that works. So all we can do is comment on what you've done. We cannot advise or comment on whether that was the right or wrong decision, or whether you should or shouldn't have done that. All we would be saying is, now that you're not part of it, what's plan B? And is it robust? Is it reasonable? Is it deliverable? And if not, we'll raise concerns, which we have done.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I wanted to ask Mr. Barber a couple of questions actually around his position in terms of the audit for the council on the DSG, and I accept and understand the last comment that he made, so I'm not looking for a repeat of that comment, but it's very clear to me, as it is to everybody, not just to Grant Thornton, but to everybody involved, that this is more than a very serious situation. And it's got almost inevitable consequences as a result. So anything that Grant Thornton through the audit process is able to tell us is probably, with respect, going to tell us what we already know and what actually the world at large probably already knows. And that is that we are heading into a position from which we will find it probably impossible to recover unless the government changes its position. And so we see in the papers that the deficit in this current financial year grows, I think, from 65 million to 92 million. And in the following year, that's not going to get any less either, is it? So it gets away from us year by year by year to a position from which we will find it, I suggest, almost impossible to recover. And to try and draw some kind of business analogy, and although local government finance isn't completely able to do that as against the private sector, it seems in clear terms that we have a material erosion of reserves. And despite what might be happening with the unearmarked reserves, that goes no way towards resolving this position. We have an exhaustion of our cash position, which inevitably leads to insolvency. And I don't try to apportion any kind of blame, nor indeed any particular political position. What it means is that this authority is in terminal problems, unless or until the government can come to its rescue by one motion or another. And of course, the statutory override is very piecemeal. It's very hand to mouth. And whilst everybody is saying what they're saying, be that members, be that senior officers of the council, be that the auditors, the problem ends up back on the desk of the Director of Finance, our 151 officer, who is expected by some miracle to provide a solution, which clearly he's not going to be able to do. So I think my question for Mr. Barber is, in those circumstances, whilst you can't give advice, you can only reflect historically on what's occurred and what you think is likely to happen in the future. We do need, I think, to be in a position whereby we can address these issues with a full understanding that doesn't result in the inevitable judgment that you're going to give in 12 months' time or 24 months' time once we have gone underwater completely. And I just wondered whether there was any comments you wanted to make back on that. I would look to myself and others, I'm sure, to try and have every sort of support mechanism that we possibly could have cross-party and across the council for a problem which we've never faced before, but which we can see could lead to our terminal decline. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Barber or your colleague, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So in terms of solutions, I have other councils that have significant DSG deficits and bigger deficits than BCP. So there is clearly a cohort of upper tier councils out there that have this challenge, and the cash position and, dare I say, the removal of the statutory override will mean that a large number of councils will be swallowed up and be in a position where, without further government intervention, they won't be able to continue. So there clearly will have to be a solution. And we've had a new government now, and we don't know what is on the horizon in terms of a solution to this. I suppose from an audit point of view, there is a couple of things here, which is one is the impact on the value for money work that we're responsible for, which is specific to the public sector. In the private sector, the auditors are only required to sign off the accounts, and we're presenting our views here this evening. On the opinion side, clearly, one of the requirements within the opinion is the concept of going concern, and whether the accounts are produced on a going concern assumption. Now, that in the private sector has become an increasing focus of auditors, given some of the challenges facing business at the moment. Within local government, historically, auditors have not spent as much time at challenging the assumption of producing accounts based on going concern, because there is there is guidance out there that, irrespective of what happens, if a council does find itself in technical insolvency, government will step in, and you will be cited of that happening in various other councils, and there will be intervention. So the continuation of service, because the services will carry on, maybe not delivered in quite the same form by the same people, but they will carry on, and that is the overarching reason why we as auditors can continue to conclude, and we will do in 23-24 as well once we've completed the audit, that the council is a going concern and can produce the accounts on that basis. But other than that, Councillor, I'm not able to really sort of provide any further insight into what else can be done. I think it's just a case of once councils do start getting into a position where there's no way out, what government intervention and what form it takes, and what remedies are arrived at. Because if not, if any of those, the statutory override, or dare I say the cash position, becomes so serious that you're not able to continue, there will need to be government intervention.
Thank you. Do you want to come back, Councillor Beasley?
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, and I thank Mr. Barber for those comments. I suppose it does leave me still in the position of asking a question to which there is probably no answer this evening, and that is that whilst everybody is doing, in terms of process, everything that they possibly can, we are not making any headway against the main problem. And of course, as I said earlier, that then ends up in front of our Director of Finance as an insoluble problem about which he is probably doing absolutely everything he or any other colleague could possibly do. It's a very difficult position. It's one in which the organisation itself needs to pull itself together as best it possibly can in a supportive role throughout that process. And by that, I mean not just members. I don't just mean those on the cabinet, but I mean every senior officer of this council, in order that we make absolutely certain that we don't end up in a position of isolation around finance because of these problems. Because I think that would be probably the most undermining thing that we could do. And I think the final thing I would say, Chairman, if there is anything in terms of support, anything in terms of discussion that any member can give, that should be taken with open arms. And I give as an example myself, having had almost a lifetime in local government finance now and presented 12 budgets in our council chamber in the past, I know how difficult the problem can become. This is way beyond anything that any of us have experienced before. And sometimes that cross-party approach can reap some sort of benefits, not necessarily just locally, but with government as well. It can send out the right signals that actually everybody is behind what we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to salvage our position out of the DSG fiasco that has not been of our making, but is there for us to remedy one way or another. I'll leave it there, Chairman, but it is supposed to be a message of support rather than anything else that people might want to try and interpret. And it is to try and make sure that our external auditors understand the degree of concern and integration that members cross-party have got in this very substantial issue.
Thank you, Councillor Beasley. Councillor Trent, you indicated you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have to say that I'm really quite upset about the way things developed on the safety valve. And some of the organisations that were objecting to it gave some very useful information, and this was back sort of January time and so on. And some of that information indicated that had the national budget in February or whenever it was put a small proportion of the money towards dealing with that problem, albeit temporarily, it would have actually have reduced the threat to, I think, about half the current councils that could go technically bankrupt because of this. I tried sort of pushing the idea, trying to get it sort of adopted. I think I remember sort of sending out emails to media organisations and so on. Why isn't this part of the whole general election discussion? And I heard the tiniest of references to it on Newsnight, I think, one evening, and that was about it. And I'd say the debt could have been sorted out for probably about 1/10 of the money that was given away at the last national budget. 1/3 of that total could have wiped the problem out, although even if all that had happened, there was still an underlying problem in the system. So it would have built up again without some sort of changes. And I do think that we should be pushing that problem as hard as we can, and hoping that the new government looks at it and faces the problem. But we need a plan B, and we need to do what our neighbouring council did, although I've had mixed reports back as to whether it was working or not, and that was that they had to use a safety valve, and they did about 2 years ago. And I think we need to have, and I agree with the previous speaker, we actually need some cross-party working on what the options are to solve this problem, because it's no good it becoming a political football like it did earlier on this year. I thought that was that just made the whole situation untenable. And unfortunately, the people higher up that could have supported us actually made it worse and started to make a bit of an issue out of it from the wrong point of view, even though they were part of the people that had helped cause the problem. So I do think that we actually need to look at some kind of cross-party consensus on this, and I do think that we need to push the need to get something done through all the various bits of the local government association or whatever to get to a solution, because quite frankly, if we don't, we're all in trouble. And the longer it goes on, the more expensive it's going to be to sort out. So, it's just really an appeal that let's get sorting it out, and not have a repeat of the situation we had earlier on this year, which didn't help us one little bit, because a hard decision's got to be made. And unless we get the government ride to the rescue, and with their commitments to maintaining the existing budgets and not sort of changing taxes or whatever, I think they're not going to be as helpful as we want them to be unless they see how bad the problem is.
Okay.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you, Tony. I've got Councillor Eleanor Connolly indicating next, so I'll bring you in finally. Mike, is that Eleanor?
Yeah, sorry to come back again. I wasn't sure when the best point to interject this would be, but I was going to make a suggestion about a letter from the committee to the two new Secretaries of State, because my understanding is that BCP is one of the more severely affected councils, where the situation might be a good idea to articulate how serious the problem is for BCP. I'm wondering what other committee members would think about that.
Mr. Richards is indicating he can give you an answer to that suggestion.
Well, just to emphasise, the previous leader of the council has already written to ministers, as leader of the council. In her capacity as a local MP, she has already written to ministers. The chief exec has written to various people, including ministers. I have written to the Director of Finance at MHCLG. We've hopefully started that conversation. Hopefully we are working towards them giving us support, advice and guidance as to what the plan B that Councillor Trent referred to looks like, so that we can then set a budget for 25-26 that is legal and balanced, which is something that, as Councillor Beasley said, I am particularly focused on as Director of Finance.
Can I ask you mentioned a couple of letters come from the council leader and the chief executive. Is it possible that those two letters could be circulated to committee members so we know what's been said?
My letter was part of the pack that went with the MTFP update report to Cabinet last week, so it's already in the public domain.
Okay. Councillor Trent.
Yeah, can I just support what the last two speakers have said now, that we actually work together as a committee and cross-party to make sure that we really emphasise this fact and we don't end up creating another political football, either dealing with the plan B or in the approach to government, because we do really need to get something done about this, because because it's not just us. I'm hoping it does get regarded with some degree of urgency, but I do think we need to work together on that, and it shouldn't be one side is saying this, one side is saying that, and so on. I do think we need to work together, and we have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 MPs, one of which from the three main sort of political parties sort of thing. So really, if we can get them on side, all singing from the same hymn sheet, then maybe that will help a bit. But I think we all need to do our little bit in sort of trying to make that happen.
We can do that. I've got Graham Farrett, the Chief Executive, joining us online. Graham, do you want to make a comment, please?
Thank you, Chair. If I could, it's really just to emphasise A, what we're doing, and B, the fact that there are two challenges for us. One is the long-term challenge that the government grant within the high needs block is not sufficient to pay for the cost of the service that we have to statutorily provide. That's the root of the problem, because we're spending roughly £30 million a year more than we are getting by way of government grant for that service. And the statutory override says you cannot fund it from the general fund. So we are therefore required to put it over there. If this were any other service, we'd have to make £30 million worth of savings from somewhere in order to be able to pay for it. But this statutory override is worded in such a way that it goes into the off-balance sheet, often referred to as the offshore account, and sits there, not featuring on our balance sheet, but causing us the cash flow challenge. And at some point, as the auditor has indicated, at some point that will crystallise. And when it crystallises, it will fall one way or the other. Somebody has to fund it at some point from their balance sheet. That's the medium-term challenge. And at the moment, that's heading towards £100 million. I think it's going to be 92 million or so. So heading towards 100 million. The second challenge is the fact that we have to cash flow that expenditure. And that's the short-term challenge, because within a year, before the statutory override finishes, we will run out of cash. We won't have enough cash to fund it. That's the immediate problem that we're facing up to government. And that's the area where BCP Council is the first, as far as I can tell, amongst the local authorities to be saying, that's our problem, it's cash flow. We've had discussions with them. We've presented them with some potential solutions. Government could just give us next year's DSG grant early. It could allow us to keep the cash that we collect for business rates and not pass it to government. There's a number of other solutions. So we have offered them solutions. Collectively, we have to push them to answer that cash flow issue quickly, because in September or October, Adam and his team have to start preparing the budget for next year. And we believe it's in next year that we will run out of cash. So we have to have a solution to that by September, October, November. That's the key thing for us to push. The longer term challenge is the one that affects most councils or more councils, which is what on earth do you do with that debt when it does crystallise? Where does it fall, and how do you afford to pay for it? So just to be clear, there are those two challenges. We're being very clear about them. We are raising them at every single opportunity with DFE, MHCLG, as they now are, any government minister that will listen, any of our MPs. We've got them coming in for a briefing on the 2nd of August, hopefully. So there are a number of channels, and I would just sort of emphasise to the committee that we're doing everything we can, including coming up with potential solutions that government have not suggested themselves. And those two that I've just mentioned, for example, we've said, why don't we? Government have not said, could we? But we have said, why don't we collectively do that? So I just want to reassure the committee, we're absolutely onto it. I do find it a little bit disappointing that the biggest issue within the auditor's annual report actually is that created by government affecting the council rather than being created by our own mismanagement or anything like that. And that's the challenge on the safety valve issue. We've produced a 15-year plan in order to bring that expenditure down to within the budget. That plan has not been challenged by anybody. Nobody's come up with a better plan, despite the fact that it's been searched over tooth and nail by the Delivering Better Value team and by the Safety Valve team. Nobody's come up with a better plan. So we are effectively implementing that plan to give members reassurance, but it still leaves us in a cash flow deficit, and it still leaves us with the money held on the off-balance sheet account. So I hope that's reassuring and worrying.
Okay, I've got Councillor. Okay, wait, then we probably need to sort of move on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Graham. That was really helpful to explain it and outline it, and it answered one of my questions I'd noted down, which is, how much time do we have to hope and pray for a rescue package to come along? Sounds like that's September and October of this year. And if that doesn't sort of transpire, I'm looking at one of the key recommendation SW2 in the auditor's report that's on page 32 or page 23 summarised. And they've mentioned that we should apply for a capitalisation direction. Can someone remind me what are the disadvantages of a capitalisation direction, or what strings come attached with it? Because I can't quite remember.
Adam, your answer.
So the way a capitalisation direction works is it allows us to borrow to finance that revenue expenditure, because as everybody will know, you're not allowed to borrow to finance revenue expenditure as a basic principle, but it would allow you to borrow to finance that revenue expenditure. In order to get that permission from government, the first thing they would say is you have to repay that borrowing over 20 years. So therefore, we have to allow for that repayment, because at the moment, with regards to the DSG deficit, there is no money being set aside because of that statutory override to allow for that repayment. This would allow you to start making provision for the repayment of that debt. And then there's also, because you've got yourself into the position in the first place, the capitalisation direction comes with a 1% premium. So, whatever the normal debt is, say it's 5%, you actually debt will cost you 6% because there's 1% premium on that. So, it doesn't seem instinctively the right way to go.
No.
But if it's the only option available to you, it might be the direction you have to go.
So
discuss.
Potentially that could buy us a little bit more time until there's this whole cohort of councils due to sort of collapse around the same time. Because it sounded like from what Graham was saying that this might not become an urgent issue in the government's mind quickly enough for us, as in September, October this year, but there is still an option to get a little bit more time.
Yeah, that option would obviously allow you to, if it was permitted, allow you to set a balanced budget for 25, 26, accepting that you would have to find savings, efficiencies to cover the cost of the 1% premium and the cost of the repayments as part of that process. So that would be a challenge in itself. But I think, we've got to recognise here that I think the LGA produced something today that indicated that the current DSG deficit nationally has increased from 300 million in 2018-19 and now stands at 3.16 billion pounds.
Yeah.
So as you point out, we're not alone,
no.
But because, as Graham said, because of the cash flow issue, we seem to be ahead of some people with regards to looking for an immediate resolution.
For that, Councillor Tully needs to propose that we accept the recommendation.
Yeah, I did indicate earlier. I just wanted to thank Councillor Beasley for his offer of support, and I know I'm not a cabinet member, but I'm a fellow ward councillor of the portfolio holder, and I'm sure if he was here, he'd want to thank him for his offer of support on this a very tricky time. But yes, I propose that we note the recommendations as laid down in the external auditor's report, and thank them very much for a report and for presenting tonight.
Thank you. I could have a seconder for that. Councillor Trent got in there first. Right, so thank you for that. Can I thank Grant Thornton, both of you, for all the hard work that you put in with obviously tight deadlines and obviously numerous other councils which you're servicing as well, because I think, Mr. Barber, this is the second committee that you've addressed this evening. Hopefully you haven't got another one to go to now. With that, you can stay and watch the rest of our meeting if you want, but if you want to do something else, you're free to go, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just to reciprocate the thanks, because it is the first Auditor's Annual Report for 23-25 issued this year, and I do have 8 councils, and that wouldn't have been possible without the support of officers who are clearly very busy doing lots of other things as well.
Thank you for that. Well, I think we've accepted. It's just noting we're not making a decision. We don't need a formal vote. Okay. Item 7, Treasury Management Outturn 2023-2024 and Q1 2024-25 update. This is a report that sets out the monitoring of the Council's Treasury Management function for April 23 to March 2024. And we've got Matt Filmer to present his report. So over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Audit and Governance Committee. So the report starts off as normal with an economic background update to give a bit of context in terms of where the Treasury Management function is operating. Back in June, the Bank of England once again froze the bank rate at 5.25%. That's the 7th consecutive freeze on that rate. We have seen inflation fall down to 2% at the last measure, which, although is the target for the Bank of England at 2%, there were signs within that result that there was still quite a number of areas in the economy, such as the service sector, where they were still seeing high levels of inflation. So the current economic forecast for cuts in the bank rate, which is set out on table 1 of the report, is Q3 of this calendar year, hopefully after sort of August time, down to 5% and then 4.5% by the end of this year. So moving on to table 2, which sets out the Treasury Management performance for 23-24, and overall we underspent against budget of 789,000, and that was predominantly because of higher investment returns than what we factored into the budget. We did overspend on interest paid on borrowings, you'll see at the top line, and that's all down to short-term borrowing that we had to take out towards the latter part of the year. And you'll see that short-term borrowing on table 3 of the report, and you'll see we actually paid quite high levels of interest attached to those short-term borrowing because they were taken around March time when cash is very short for local authorities. So we did have to pay over the odds for some of that borrowing to carry over through the year. And then table 4 sets out the council's total debt position as at the end of March 24. So you'll see the first line external borrowing, 295 million, which refers back to the table 3 of total borrowing that we had at the end of the year. The next line is what we refer to as internal borrowing, so where we've used cash to fund capital expenditure rather than go out and borrow for that purpose. And that currently stands at just shy of 214 million. So that means that we could technically borrow 214 million tomorrow and we wouldn't be in breach of any rules because that's allowable as part of our capital expenditure in previous financial years. And table 5 of the report sets out the investments held as at the 31st of March, which stood at over 28 million. Now moving on to the Treasury Management performance for 24-25. Table 6 sets out the forecast for this year, and we're currently forecasting an overspend of just shy of 1.5 million. And that is principally, that's all down to the loss of investment interest on our balances. There's 2 reasons for that. One, we've seen a fast track of the council's new build housing and acquisition strategy. So since December last year, we've spent over £33 million purchasing houses in the conurbation, around 116 houses in that time. Now, although we allow some of that expenditure in our forecast for cash, we didn't forecast that level of expenditure in that short time period. So that's why the balances have dropped so significantly. And as we mentioned, the previous agenda item at length, we're also seeing obviously the impact of the DSG, which is starting to bite on cash balances. And if you look at table 7, which sets out the council's average investment cash balances that we've held since April 2022, you can see the trajectory of cash dropping year on year. You'll see normally we see a spike in cash come April. That's when we look to get lots of council tax and business rate receipts. In most years, that's been the case, but we're starting to see, particularly this year, that hasn't. We actually saw cash drop in April, which is the first time since BCP's inception. Table 8 sets out the council's borrowing as at the end of June. And again, you'll see we held £25 million worth of short-term borrowing. And investments at the end of June was just over 5 million. So again, you can see those investments dropping year on year. And lastly, Chair, just to highlight, we are looking to try and organise a training session on Treasury management with the Audit and Governance Committee, which hopefully will be held within next couple of months and administered by our Treasury management consultants. So I'll stop there, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Okay. Councillor Mike Cox, who is the portfolio holder for finance, has got a short paragraph which he's asked me to read out, commenting about this. This report identifies quite starkly the financial burden which the current DSG funding issue continues to have on the council. Last year, due to increases in interest rates, we were able to provide a very favourable variance. That's shown on table 2. As a result of the shortfall in funding for the ballooning BSG deficit, vividly demonstrated by the reduction in cash levels on table 7, there is a significant projected adverse variance in the current year. That's the end of the statement Councillor Cox has asked me to read out. Committee, have you got any questions or comments, Councillor Armstrong?
Thank you. Is with regards to the purchase programme that has recently been paused. Is that a recent thing that it's been paused? I'm just speaking within the context of us having a housing crisis and how much we need accommodation for people in the area. Is there any sort of plan going forward to reinstigate that programme, and how long is it paused for? Sorry, does that make any sense? Yeah.
For you, Chair, I'm not aware it has been paused, but others may have heard that.
The purchase programme, that I'm just referring to an email actually that I've got here from Kelly Dean that says that the purchase programme has been paused, and that we've successfully
Your microphone's off.
Apologies. I take it that was the programme that you were talking about that does compulsory purchasing of housing.
Mr. Richards?
So just to be clear, that purchase programme that you have in that email with Kelly is not compulsory purchasing. That is the authority going into the marketplace and buying homes that are suitable for generally families that we need to move out of bed and breakfast into more suitable accommodation. You know, I can't speak for Kelly, but the reason probably why she said the word paused, and I'm only suggesting this, is because she's actually hit her target in the sense that she had a programme of buying X number of homes, and she's purchased those homes at breakneck speed, you know, in order to alleviate that problem. The problem with buying them so quickly and through that process with a lot of energy throughout the authority put on doing that is actually there's cash going out the door, which has caused Matt a problem because it went out quicker than he was expecting it to go out. And that's why we get a deficit in year. Hopefully I've explained that.
Yeah, that's really clear. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I've got nobody else indicating wanting to comment about this. Oh, Councillor Ellen Conley,
yes.
sorry.
Sorry, no, one quick question. The interest paid on borrowing 167,000 over budget. You talked about that briefly, but I was wondering if that reflected interest rates not coming down as quickly or as far as you thought, and did that suggest a kind of a sort of dynamic approach to your approach to borrowing to try to make the most of how interest rates were? Is that what was going on there, or was it something else?
Mr. Phil?
Through you, Chair. I think by the end of the year, I don't think we'd expected cash balances to be as low as we'd forecast as per the budget. Particularly around March time, it was short. So that's why we then entered the local authority market to borrow what you can see on table 3 from other local authorities. But unfortunately, March traditionally is where you pay the highest rate. And that's why we had that overspend, because we were paying over the odds effectively, because that was the most readily available cash at that time.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, we've got a recommendation here that the Audit and Governance Committee note the reported activity of the Treasury Management Function 23-24, and to note the reported activity for the Treasury Management Function for April to June 2024. Just for the record, if we can have that proposed and seconded, Councillor Tarling, Councillor Armstrong, so that's obviously carried, accepted. So thank you for that, Mr. Filmer. Thank you very much for that. The next item on the agenda is item 8, Risk Management Corporate Risk Register Update. This is a report that updates councillors on the position of the council's corporate risk register. And we've got joining us online Fiona Manton. So Fiona, over to you if you'd like to present your report on this, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. This is the quarterly update to the committee of the council's corporate risk register. As part of the continuing development of risk management and reporting of, to assist members this quarter, I've included again a summarised version of the risk management process we follow. This is included as Appendix 1 on page 105 of the report bundle. To further support members in the approach of the Council, at Appendix 2 on page 107, I've included the Council's risk management matrix, and the definitions are also provided there. The matrix included is a 4x4 matrix where the risks are mapped by assessing both the likelihood and the impact. The basis of the assessment in terms of the impact is provided by the definitions on page 108, with the likelihood being outlined on page 109 of the report. The assessment, you'll note, is based on 7 possible aspects of the risk and encourages factors other than financial risk to be considered to ensure the full implications of each risk are understood and evaluated. In addition to these documents, to continue to assist members, I've provided a little background around the approach to risk management and the quarterly process we follow. Each of the corporate risks that we have are owned or have the oversight of a corporate director. Each quarter, each risk is reviewed in terms of the following criteria by the risk lead. So we ask ourselves, does the risk title best describe the risk? Are there any additional mitigations to note? What future key actions are planned in the near future? What update can be provided on the risk for the quarter? What changes are there to each aspect of the risk scoring? Are there any changes to the overall risk strategy in terms of the treatment of that risk? My role is then to collate the updates and report on the risk register. The format of the report on the risk has been developed over time, with adjustments being made following feedback from officers or from this committee, and these adjustments continue. We're always happy to receive feedback and adjust the style of the report if that would assist members in their understanding or the reporting of the risks. The register you see here today is the corporate risk register. This represents the top level for the organisation and sits at the top of the risk pyramid. By this I mean that sat below these registers are key assurance, directorate, project, and in some instances team risk registers. So this one sits at the top and the others fan out beneath. On the completion of the quarterly reporting cycle, the corporate risks are routinely shared with the risk champions in each directorate, who use this to inform and consider in terms of their own directorate risk registers and the ongoing reviews. To ensure the completeness of the process, directorate risk registers are on occasion also reviewed by the Corporate Management Board to ensure that we have a top-down and a down-up approach in terms of risk. And this allows for the escalation via this process and also consideration of commonality of risk across the authority. On an ad hoc basis, we also consider and escalate individual risks. These may come from any source and are considered during any one quarter and presented to CMB as part of the overall risk review. This is an ongoing and dynamic process. The risk register reported is a snapshot in time. Risk management continues to develop, and both the review process and reporting will continue to evolve to ensure it remains fit for purpose for the organisation. At Appendix 3 of this report, a dashboard is provided which provides the snapshot of information and shows the movement or trends in the risks over the last 12 months. In relation to this quarter's updates, at paragraph 10, the changes to or highlights are included, and in summary, the changes are to risk CR02, which has been combined previously with CR12. This is in relation to children's services. CR4 has been updated. This is a risk around ICT disruption and networks and cyber attack. Risk CR08 is present on the register. This is the risk which is we may fail to run a fair and open election / referendum. This risk continued on the register during the quarter due to the elections taking place on the 4th of July. Obviously, in view of the dynamic nature of the risk register, the risk will likely be removed in the next reporting cycle from the corporate risk register and revert back to a directorate level risk register. So effectively, any movements on and off the risk register, the risks don't get lost, they just move back into a service or directorate level review. CR15 has been updated and a position on that has been reported. CR16, 20 and 24 and 25 have all been populated. These were a mixture of new risks to the organisation, and a full update has been provided in Appendix 4. Appendix 4 is included in the report and it's on page 113. And as mentioned, this is a snapshot in time. So obviously the risk register is subject to change continually. And at a certain point in time, we capture it. But obviously new risks and changes are being considered all the time. In terms of the continuing development of risk management, the process of developing new risk management policy continues, and this is going to be hopefully concluded during the next quarter, with the final draft being available towards the end of the year. The team continues to monitor and circulate risk information as set out in paragraph 25 of the report on page 102. This demonstrates how we share new risk information across the organisation. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present my report. I'd be happy to assist if I can with any questions.
Thank you for your presentation and report. Councillor Phipps.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about, I think it would relate to CR15, failing to have in place suitable talent attraction, retention, etc., to do with staff really. Because what I am finding in the day-to-day works, that I do with the council and things that come my way, is that we do have quite a shortage of staff in quite a lot of departments. And I think it is seriously affecting the efficiency of some of those departments. And in some departments, I believe it is affecting frontline services, that they are just not, we don't have the relevant staff to carry out some of the actions they should be doing on the front line. I have queried it, and this is just for instance, we're seriously short. This is just a for instance that I've got, and I know this. We are seriously short, for instance, of tree officers, 3 in environment, 2 in planning vacancies. Can't seem to attract anybody or get anybody, and therefore trying to get something done out there on the street is just very, very difficult. And these are frontline services. It's the same with waste and waste operations, and we're actually using agency staff. I am aware of that, which obviously is very costly because we can't seem to get the staff. And those are just 2 examples. So I like to know where in here, because I'm looking at CR15, it doesn't seem to say anything about frontline services at all. It's more about, well, you can read it yourself, pay and increases in pay and well-being of staff, etc., etc. It's all very good stuff. But where is the potential impact on frontline services? And is this anywhere in here as a risk? And if it's not, should it be? Thanks.
Fiona, CR15, does that need expansion or improvement?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the people strategy and the reference in the description of the risk at the top, there is reference there, improved talent attraction and retention. So I think probably what we're talking about is both of those elements. What I shall do is take away the question and have a conversation with the risk lead, the Director of People and Culture, and send a separate written response if that's in order.
Yeah, I think we should have somewhere in there recruitment as well, because it's, obviously if people do leave for whatever reason, then we're not seeming able in certain departments to recruit. Maybe there aren't people out there, but how are we going to deal with this? Because I think it is seriously affecting some of our frontline services, and I do think we need to be addressing that, or at least recognising that within our risk register. So yeah, I would like perhaps somebody to come back on this, please. Thank you. How can we facilitate that being brought back? How will that work?
Councillor Claire White.
I think that Margaret made a good point, and could I be included in your response to her, Fiona, please, and anybody else? Yeah, the rest of the committee then, please.
And then obviously perhaps the independent two members. On the subject of the independent members, I've got Lindy joining us remotely on Teams. I think you've got your hand up to ask a question or make a comment, Lindy.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good evening, everyone. My question, the first question was answered. Thank you, Fiona. I'm looking forward to receiving the new risk policy later in the year, the amended one. And then my second question was on whether the council has done a self-assessment or an external assessment on the risk maturity at BCP. Have you started with a process like that?
Fiona?
Thank you, through you, Chair. We haven't done a risk maturity exercise or assessment, and it certainly would be something we should consider, and I will look into that. I think what I would say is we do review ourselves, we compare ourselves against other local authorities, we compare risk registers, so we do a sense check, if you like, in terms of our risks versus other authorities' risks, because obviously whilst we are all different, there are some commonalities as well that it's worthy to look at. And we also include some other organisations other than local authorities, because we don't want to be too inward looking all the time. So I think probably extending that exercise into as well, perhaps a maturity exercise would be helpful. So I'll take that away. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question or observation to make. University students, potential graduates who we could take on and employ. I'm aware of one person who went into one department of the council where the comment was made, "Oh, we don't often do work experience." Obviously, that's something which I know some councils do, and certainly those sections, planning could be one, that we should be encouraging or trying to get students who happen perhaps live locally or in Dorset or in Hampshire to come here for work experience. I think in the auditing department, Mr. Stannard, you have pioneered this with graduates who've come here, and it's something which we probably need to think outside the box and to attracting people by perhaps giving them a week's work experience, where perhaps a couple of years' time, when they do eventually graduate, they might think of applying to BCP. Mr. Richards.
Chair, from personal experience, I actually do know that a number of services do exactly that. For example, legal services did that for my own daughter several years back before she went off to university. So it is something that a lot of services do engage in, that kind of activity where where it's appropriate to do so.
Okay. Have we got any other comments or observations? Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. It's with regards to the risk about partnerships. It's a new risk, newly identified risk. I'm really glad to see it on the register and getting some attention. I just wanted to check the scoring on it, because on the main log it says 6, and I think later on it says it's a 9. So I just wanted clarity on that. Also, because it is a relatively new risk, I'm just wondering whether there could be a bit more of a dive into it, and to look at in terms of, are we doing everything that we can to enable and empower our communities with regards to partnership working, particularly with like smaller community groups, with the voluntary sector, because certainly within sort of my view of the world, I'd find there are so many blockages to community, like just from your average person who wants to get involved with cutting a hedge to a community group that want to apply for funding, and so on and so on, up to much bigger partnerships that you might have with corporates and bigger charities. So I just looking at what's the analysis on the register, I just don't feel that it goes far enough. There's so much more bureaucracy and barriers that we could look at how we can overcome them or just get rid of them.
Fiona?
Thank you, Chair. The scoring of the risk, there are 3 scores that relate to each risk. So the gross score of this risk is 9, the net score is 6, and the target score is 3. So that's why there's the slight difference showing. In relation to the risk itself, in terms of a deeper dive, perhaps the committee would welcome the opportunity to have the risk owner attend the next meeting to outline perhaps more detail around the risk and go into the more deeper information, so that the members are satisfied and assured that the risk is being adequately managed, and expand on any points that would be helpful.
Would that be of use? Yes, we've got a nodding here. Okay, perhaps if that could be potentially arranged. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, thank you very much. I wasn't going to ask a question because I've spoken to Fiona a lot in the past. Just regarding the various different risk owners, what level of moderation do you apply to different risk owners? Because varieties of different groups of people respond differently to risks, and is there a sense of moderation, is the right word, applied to these risk tables?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just cover that off, I suppose, in a number of ways. Firstly, as the risk team, we will challenge and question the risk scorings from a sense check point of view, and also taking into account any changes in the operating environment. So if there's new legislation that impacts on a particular risk or a particular area, we will ask the question. So there is a challenge. Obviously, the risk register, the corporate risk register, is owned by the Corporate Management Board, so there is oversight by that board, and I would imagine there sometimes is a discussion about what level of risk should apply, so they may well challenge each other.
Yeah, I can't come back. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, I have no more people indicating they want to speak. So we've got a recommendation here, which I'll read out. The members of the Audit and Governance Committee note the update provided in this report relating to the corporate risks, and I'll propose that from the chair and we'll accept that. So Fiona, thank you very much. And obviously at the next meeting, which was a quarter's time, we look forward to you joining us again with a colleague for your presentation. So thank you for that. Thank you. Item 9 on the agenda is the internal audit, first quarter 2024-2025 audit plan update. And this is for Mr. Nigel Stannard. Mr. Stannard, over to you.
Thank you, Chair.
And good evening, members. I'm trialing some new glasses today, so forgive me if I go squiffy and I can't quite see where I am. So I realise I can't see close up. So agenda item 9. During Q1 of any financial year, you can probably intuitively imagine that the internal audit team is both kicking off the new year audit work and completing the old year audit work. As a line in the sand, the audit charter approved by this committee does state that the field work determines which year the audit falls in and is thus reported. If our field work does straddle the financial year, the audit forms part of the previous year and the new year audit plan, and thus contributes to the overall audit opinion of both years. Please recall, committee, that we are now posting the full internal audit reports using the same numbering in this report to the MS Team site that you all have membership of. Members are free, therefore, to look at all, some or none, depending on your preference, of the detailed audit reports. Questions on detail can be asked outside of this public meeting, as the reports do contain exempt and confidential information. As required by the committee-approved audit charter, there is the usual more detailed summary of the issues contributing to the partial assurance opinions, and they're shown at paragraph 4 on page 170 onwards. I'd also like to point out that the SPD pilot project continues to deliver significant extra council tax yield, the aggregate figure now standing at £405,000, and there is no slow up in the rate at which we are taking those single person discounts out. The implementation of audit recommendations by management remains good and mainly timely. Paragraph 19 onwards highlights where there have been delays in implementing high RECs from the original target date. Explanations for delays appear reasonable in my professional judgment, but committee is reminded it could call officers in or seek further written explanations if it wishes to, and those recommendations are shown in Appendix 1. Finally, Chair, I'd just like to reassure the committee that the internal audit team is at full budgeted complement. There are no vacancies in the staffing group as we speak, and rapidly touching wood. Happy to take any questions at that point, Chair.
Thank you for that. You quickly touched on something and you used an abbreviation which perhaps members of the public, perhaps in some of the committee wouldn't appreciate. SPD, that's to do with council tax. I don't really couldn't expand on that.
Yes, sorry, Chair. Single person discount. That stands for SPD, single person discount. That is an award that does what it says on the tin. So a resident who is single receives a council tax discount.
Right, committee, you've got some questions and queries, Mr. Stannard. Check. Other people aren't indicating to speak. Councillor Claire Way.
Yeah, just to say, because I did express some scepticism, didn't I, about the single person discount being as successful as it has been. So yeah, happy to be proved wrong that it's been working so well. That's brilliant.
Thank you for that. Emma Connolly, sorry, I didn't see you indicating. Over to you.
No, don't worry. And you just put my hand up. It's just a question about the finding on children's services and agency workers. Would you see that as a new issue, or would you see that as linked to known issues previously, like a symptom of a problem that officers are already aware of?
Thank you. I think it's fair to say it's a long-standing problem, and it reflects in many ways the observations that Councillor Phipps has observed, where it's just simply very tricky to get permanent staff, and the service has determined that, you know, rather than have no staff, agency staff, albeit more expensive agency staff, is the the option to go with. So it's probably reflective of the employment situation in that high risk area.
Thank you for that. I think other departments, planning have historically used agency staff, but I believe they've now ceased that, and there aren't agency staff. And it's obviously something which, bear in mind, yes, agency staff are very expensive. It's something that we should try and pursue where at all possible. Right. I couldn't know anybody else. Councillor Starling.
Yeah, Mr. Sar referred to a Teams channel. Obviously, it's not necessary for the committee, but if you could send out a link of how I find it, I'm on my Teams at the moment. I don't think I can actually find a link to the site. So if an email could come out to members for those older members that are probably not quite as Teams ready.
I can do that.
Just a standard here.
Yeah, I can do that, and I'll also make sure the new committee members have that link. Yes,
thank you. So we've got a recommendation here. I'll just read out just for the record, members of the public who haven't perhaps got the agenda in front of them. Note progress made and issues arising on the delivery of the 2023, 24 and 24-25 internal audit plans. Note the explanations provided in Appendix 1 and determine in the case of high and medium priority recommendations highlighted if further explanation and assurance from the service / corporate director is required. So let's say essentially this is to note. So thank you for your report, Mr. Stannard. I think you are presenting the next one, which is item 10. Annual review of declarations of interests, gifts and hospitality by officers for 2023, 2024. So, Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. In many ways, the next 5 reports on your agenda are various building blocks for you to consider the annual governance statement, and they tick off terms of reference elements of your planned work. So this report is broken down into 2 key parts. The first part is a reminder that you reviewed and approved the evolution of the policy back in March 24. This is all explained in paragraphs 5 to 9. Just expanding slightly on paragraph 9 and the bespoke training and awareness sessions. These have been more extensive this year and have included all of the commercial operations team at the invitation of Amanda Barry, the director. And this was in response to the Bayside report and the recommendations therein. The Council's Senior Leadership Network has also had an awareness session back in April 24, and that was instigated by the Chief Executive. The second part of the report summarises the work undertaken by internal audit to confirm policy compliance across the Council. And updating paragraph 10 as at today, there are 2 outstanding Form 2s from Tier 4 officers and above, and that means that we have 117 out of the 119 officers in that category compliant. The 2 that are missing, the officers are currently off sick, but the forms will be obtained when they return. Please note paragraph 11. This is a classic example of why the policy exists and demonstrates effectiveness. A whistleblower had the perception that a conflict of interest existed, but the issues have been declared and management had pre-agreed some mitigations to manage any perception of that conflict. And when that was explained to the whistleblower, they were content with that response. My overall conclusion, therefore, is the policy is fit for purpose and there is generally a good level of assurance and compliance across the Council.
Thank you for your report. Any questions or queries on that? With that form, the officers have to return. Obviously, if they've had no gifts or hospitality, they still have to complete it and sign it, even if it's blank, 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 blank. Yes. They can't use the excuse that they've had no hospitality for not filling it in. No.
That's correct, Chair. There's two different types of categories of staff. So the tier 4 and above staff are generally those staff that make all the key decisions in the council, and they must make a base declaration and keep that base declaration up to date, even if it's a nil declaration. All other staff below tier 4, they only have to make a direct declaration if they have something to declare. And generally those staff make more operational decisions and not the key decisions in the council.
And the query, is there a sort of minimum amount, or even if it's a £5 book token, they still have to declare it?
There is a minimum amount. Gifts is £25 and hospitality is £50 and above. Generally, however, a lot of officers choose to discount those and make declarations 0 and above.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. Obviously, this is an annual report, so we're not being presented with anything which is out of order. It's something that will come to us again in 12 months' time. So we've got a recommendation there, which I'll read out for the members of the public who don't have the agenda in front of them. 1, Audit and Governance Committee note the annual review of declarations of interest, gifts and hospitality of officers 23-24, and 2, endorse the opinion of Head of Audit and Management Assurance that the policy is fit for purpose and that there was a good level of awareness and compliance in 23-24. So thank you, Mr. Richards. And you're also presenting the next item on the agenda, which I was Sorry. Well, something like that. Item 11 on the agenda. We've got the. I'll read out the title: Use of Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act (RIPA). Its abbreviated form, and the Investigatory Powers Act (IPA) annual report for 23-24 financial year. And I think on this occasion, we have made use of these powers in a small way, Mr. Stowell.
I'll start again, Chair. This is a best practice annual report outlining the Council's use of RIPA and IPA legislation. Crudely speaking, in the case of RIPA, this is about covert surveillance that the Council may undertake. And in the case of IPA, this is the acquisition of communications data, such as emails or telephone calls. Both powers should only be used as a last resort, and proportionality is a big factor. And it's only to be used where the issue being investigated is subject to at least a 6-month custodial sentence if proved. The Council needs to obtain a magistrate's approval to use RIPA, and the Council policy has a robust approval route, mindful of legislation requirements to submit such a request. The Council needs to obtain Office for Communications Data authorisation, and that approval is obtained through the National Anti-Fraud Network for any communications data. That's the IPA element. The Council did not use or try to obtain RIPA approval for covert surveillance in 23-24. However, the Council obtained approval and used IPA communications data acquisition in one case in 23-24. This was a trading standards case linked to serious organised crime and involved numerous South Coast partners, including other councils and regional police forces. Please also note paragraphs 12 to 14, which explains that the Information Powers Commissioner's Office, IPCO, is currently conducting a routine 3-year inspection of BCP Council's arrangements right now. I propose to inform A&G Committee of their opinion and any recommendations they might make once we have them. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, as I stated, this is an annual report, so again, in 12 months' time, we'll be getting it presented to us again. But thank you for that explanation, how the service operates. And obviously, if the regulations are amended or improved, then we'll hear about it next year. So again, it's a recommendation to note those powers exist. And thank you very much for your report on that. Item 12 on the agenda, this is the annual breaches and approved waivers of financial regulations report for the year 2023-2024. And again, Mr. Stannard, if you could present your report, please.
Thank you again, Chair. So before we start in detail, I'd just like to clarify a couple of key basics. So breaches of financial regulations are bad, and we don't want to see them. Why are they bad? Well, following financial regulations gives the council the best chance of achieving efficient, effective procurement at best price or best value, and lessens the chance of complaints or challenges from government and or suppliers who might experience unfair and not open, transparent opportunities for council work and contracts. Approved waivers are good, caveat that in small numbers. They demonstrate good governance, good awareness of the flexibilities afforded to the council's commissioning and procurement officers in certain allowable circumstances. I do also want to give the committee my personal and professional assurance that this report is full and frank and nothing hidden. Turning to breaches, having said they're bad and we don't want to see them, we need to balance that within the context of the council's overall spend, which is about 500 million per annum on works, goods and services. That's with third parties. So the 7 breaches in 23-24 totaling 15.4 million totals about 3% of our annual spend. There's quite a difficult balance to strike here between being reluctantly noting a small number of breaches and being complacent. I would be surprised and indeed suspicious if we were reporting no breaches across our spend base, given we're such a large unitary council. I would rather suspect that our reporting and arrangements were not picking up such breaches. I want to specifically talk about the 2 large breaches by value. So firstly, turning to BR1 on the top of page 193. This breach is particularly frustrating. Everything was done right. The service followed the lawful advice of the council's expert team, which is the strategic procurement team. But for some inexplicable reason, the service and the SPT team did not complete the financial required waiver or PDR to formalise the discussions which had clearly took place and approvals discussed verbally and in emails. Now turning to BR6, this was a legacy of procurement flexibilities afforded to councils during the COVID pandemic, which were not curtailed by BCP Council when the pandemic flexibilities ended. 22 suppliers not on the council's framework contract were given work totaling approximately £5 million. It should be stated, however, that these suppliers were providing the exact same identical services to the frameworks providers. And as the sector recovered from the COVID pandemic, it is unknown if our framework suppliers at that time would have been able to supply us with the amount of work bought from those suppliers. It follows, therefore, that we may have had to adapt this off-framework contract to some degree in any case. Finally, turning to waivers, Appendix 1, given there is a lot of detail here, if a committee member has a detailed question on a specific waiver, I probably will need to respond offline and research the detail before providing the answer. As a final comment from me, as a committee, it would be perfectly reasonable for you to ask any responsible service director why a breach has occurred or why a waiver was required. You could do this by calling them to a future meeting, or you could ask for a written email response, which I could facilitate and then circulate to the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your presentation. Any questions, Councillor Tarling?
Yeah, I believe that legislation changed last year in the Procurement Act. Is that correct? And has a compliance check been done with recent legislative changes? I only ask this because I recently had to do some training, but I glazed for most of it, I have to say.
The Procurement Act 2023 was enacted in 2023, but for local government, it's applicable at the at a specified time yet to be determined. We were originally thinking prior to the election it might be autumn this year, but we now think it may be a little later. So the new Act requirements are not in local government at the moment.
Yes, come back.
Yeah, thank you. As a working for a company that supplies services to local authorities, you know, we have received training already on this, and as I don't actually work in local government on my professional side at the moment, as I said, I sort of glazed through half of it. But could I suggest that some sort of plan is put in place for training those that have a procurement function in the council in the new Procurement Act? I don't think there's any, from what I remember of my training, it was a few weeks ago, there's nothing massively changed. It relates to changes in things like, obviously, departure from the European Union and changes post-Brexit are the main changes affecting. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next person indicated to speak is Lindy, the independent member, who's joining us online. Lindy?
Thank you, Chair. I had a couple of questions earlier today that I've sent in the email, and that was successfully answered. Thank you very much on some of the waivers and questions I had on that. And well done on the breaches and waivers, that the quantity is coming down year on year, which is a good indication. I just had one remaining question left, and that is, of these breaches and waivers, how many of those were picked up by internal audit, if any? And then like for instance in the waivers, the CFO then had to approve it ad hoc and not before the expenditure was incurred. Thank you.
Mr. Stannard?
5 of the 7 breaches were identified by internal audit, and 2 breaches were self-referred. Lindy, in answer to that question. Could you repeat the second part of the question? I didn't quite hear it. My apologies.
Okay, so then in that instance, for the waivers, it would have been approved ad hoc and not before the expenditure is incurred. Because the waivers can be approved by the CFO in certain circumstances, emergencies, and if there's technical reasons, there's like one sole provider. So you've responded to the breaches, 5 of the 7, but the waivers of the 35, how many were picked up by internal audit? And then based on your response, 5 out of 7 is quite a lot to be picked up by internal audit, and only 2 was picked up by management themselves, which is now putting me in a more concerned position as to thinking maybe there might be more that's not been picked up. How certain are we, and what assurance as a committee can we have that that is a complete picture of all the breaches and waivers that has been incurred during the year?
Thank you, Lindy. With regard to waivers, the concept is not internal audit picking them up. So these are submitted by the service, and they are agreed by the strategic procurement team and then presented to the CFO to approve. Ultimately, the service director takes ownership of the need to waive financial regs. So that's the position on waivers. With regard to breaches, your observations are right, and I cannot give you 100% assurance that there haven't been breaches that haven't been identified. Internal audit can't identify everything. We don't look at everything across the council, and it therefore is plausible that there may be other breaches. What I can assure you of, and in the case of BR1's a good example actually, that we never, if we find the breach in a later year and it refers to a previous year, we would still report it. It never goes unreported because it was a previous year. So when we find things, we absolutely report them. But yeah, it's a physical impossibility to give you 100% assurance that all breaches are identified.
Okay, thank you. Got Councillor Beasley indicating next.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I've got just two questions for Mr. Stannard. The first one concerns breach BR1, which Mr. Stannard spoke about a moment ago. I note that it says the process was allowable. Could you give us the reassurance that there is nothing that should be of any concern to audit and governance over this particular breach, particularly given its size? I think I know what lies behind it, but I'd just like that reassurance.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The BR1 breach was a delay in instigating a new contract for the and it was linked to the demise of yellow buses, and therefore some new routes had to be procured, and therefore the strategic procurement gave advice to the service to go away and negotiate those with available bus operators and pick the most economically viable route. In many cases, there was only one option, but there were a couple of routes where there were two options, and obviously that's where a little mini comp, for use of a better word, was determined.
Thank you, Chair. Well, that's reassuring. I just wanted to draw that out because given the quantum involved, there might otherwise have been speculation by members or members of the public about it. The second one was with regard to breach BR6. And I just wonder whether Mr. Stannard give us the reassurance that this is not just isolated in principle to BCP Council, but during and as a result of the COVID situation, that this was probably an occurrence countrywide rather than specific just to us.
I can give Councillor Beasley the comfort that many local authorities use the flexibilities. I cannot give Councillor Beasley assurance that other councils did as we did and erroneously carried on using those when the legislation elapsed. So that was the key reason for our breach. Other councils may have done that, but I'm not aware of that.
In that case, Chairman, could Mr. Stannard give us his assurance from an internal audit position that there shouldn't be anything to concern audit and governance as a result of
that? I guess the biggest comfort I can give is that had we used our framework providers, and indeed they could supply us, because that's a big if, because they may not have been, the price paid would have been the same. So there's no extra money going out the door because we've had to use more expensive providers, for example.
Thank you, Chairman. That satisfies me.
Thank you for that. And obviously we discussed it at the pre-meeting that these are big ticket prices and a headline could be made, but as you've explained, it's not necessary. Councillor Eleanor Connolly, I think you indicated to speak.
Yeah, just to say thank you for talking to Councillor Andrews and I about this already, about BR1 and BR6. I just want to reiterate my understanding that for BR1, the team did the right thing and involved the strategic procurement team, which was the appropriate thing to do. Part of the issue is that the strategic procurement team didn't also flag the need for the PDR. Has that team been reminded of their role in reminding officers of what needs to be done there?
Yes, is the short answer. But fundamentally, the strategic procurement team is the second line defence. They should have reminded the service, but ultimately the service should know through their own understanding of financial regs that that's required. And that's why I mentioned in my verbal update that it was particularly frustrating because effectively 2 lines of defence failed. Inexplicably really, because it's never happened before and hopefully never happen again with the controls that the strategic procurement team have now put in place.
Thank you for that. Well, we've got a recommendation here that Claire, sorry.
It was just to mention about bereavement services, because I know I was quite concerned about it before. It's not a big ticket item, you'll value NA here, but I felt it was, I'm at the bottom of page 193, like a reputational risk, and I suppose there's like sentimental value of items being lost, things like that were going on. So, I mean, they may have just sort of smartened up their act while internal audit was looking at them and slip back into their old ways. Have you got any plans to go back and see how they're progressing?
We do routinely follow up recommendations as you know, through Audit and Governance Committee. In terms of understanding whether these are embedded longer term, that will be the next time we audit the service.
A year again?
Not necessarily. It's a risk basis. So realistically, because there were so many issues in bereavement service, we will probably go back sooner rather than later. But I can't explicitly give you a date at this time.
Okay, thank you for that. Oh, Monetary Officer.
Chair, can I just quickly respond to Councillor Tolling's question around training? So the procurement team do have a training programme planned. We're just trying to link it with the implementation date to make it as timely as possible, but it is definitely on the action plan for the procurement team.
Okay, noted. You're first.
Can I also make a point about that? We'll get to it on the forward plan, but later on in the year, we've got a deeper dive in one of our non-core meetings where the strategic procurement team are going to come and talk to you about the changes in legislation and how they are going to take effect in BCP Council.
Thank you for that. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. It's with regards to the waivers, Nigel. So it's just to try and understand a bit more about what do you mean by any value payments in advance. I'm looking at one of the waivers within Children's Services that's valued at £120,000. I'm just trying to understand what does that mean? Was that for services that were like bought in advance that we didn't use?
Sorry, I have to give a reason why the payment in advance is required. Sometimes it's industry standard terms and conditions, like for example, subscriptions, or where a utility company may come and dig up the road. They won't do the work without payment in advance, just standard. I would need to go away on that specific one and give you an email if that's okay, and copy the rest of the committee in.
Yeah, I think because it's in relation to young people, I'm wondering whether that's to do how that process, I'm wondering how do we fund? Is it individual young people that a budget would like be earmarked to them as individual, or is it something else? I'm just trying to understand how those payments are managed in respect of those young people, and how we could have got to a point where £120,000 was needed to be wavered.
Mr. Richards,
Chair, if I may, looking at that one in specifically, without knowing any of the detail, I recognise the supplier with Dave Wells, so he probably provided housing accommodation for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. So it was probably a payment made to secure that housing, probably at relatively short notice, which is why he wanted a payment in advance, because he probably had to displace people that were potentially using that accommodation. So those are probably that kind of arrangement occurred there, but that is all conjecture. I haven't got the detail in front of me.
No, it would be really useful to understand a bit more. Thank you.
Okay. We've got a recommendation to note the annual breaches and waivers report for 2023-24. So we know the report. Thank you, Mr. Stannard. Item 13, Chief Internal Auditor's Annual Opinion Report 23-24. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. So the public sector internal audit standards, soon to be replaced by the global internal audit standards, require me to formally report annually on the adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's internal control environment and offer a formal opinion. That said, in truth, this report is only really a consolidation and summary of everything you've previously had reported to you throughout the year in the quarterly updates and the other reports. My core opinion is shown in the executive summary on page 205 and in paragraph 4 of Appendix A on page 208. Simplified, it is my opinion that BCP Council has in place adequate, effective framework of governance, risk management and internal control. Of course, that overall opinion does not mean everything's perfect, and there are areas of control weaknesses and non-compliance with policies, but internal audit have made recommendations accordingly to correct and improve these issues. Further, service managers have agreed to implement in 100% of circumstances the recommendations made. These have been drawn out in the various Audit and Governance Committee reports throughout the year. Internal audit have a rigorous follow-up recommendation implementation regime, which is overseen and reported to this committee. Partial audit opinions are again highlighted in this report as best practice suggests to do so. And that's at table 10, sorry, the table in paragraph 10. But note, these have all previously been reported in detail to committee. The report also details how internal audit has demonstrated compliance with professional standards, and that's from paragraphs 41 onwards on page 213. As I intimated earlier, these standards are set to change from the 1st of April 2025 as global internal audit standards and a CIPFA code will replace public sector internal audit standards. The BCP team is actively ensuring compliance preparation and work is ongoing, and I'll be reporting back to committee later in the year on that. Finally, Chair, if committee could indulge me to thank my team in public on the record for their tremendous hard work and professional diligence, unwavering support and commitment to ethical and professional responsibilities to BCP Council and our respective professional institutions. Thank you, team. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. I would endorse those comments as well. I see in your report, paragraph 7 on 206, you talk about there was a sort of budgetary saving because effectively you were one person down, but obviously that meant that everybody else had to work extra hard to fill that gap. Have you been able to recruit an additional audit manager?
Yes, we have, Chair. Against the trend in national trends, actually. So yeah, very pleasing.
Well done. So if you could, I'm sure the committee would endorse what I'm going to say. You know, pass on my thanks to your team for their very hard work, because obviously, you know, coming out of COVID. Over the past 2 or 3 years, you know, lots of things, as illustrated by some of the other reports already this evening, you know, have meant extra hours having been expended on the audit thing. So this report again is to note, to note the annual report. We duly do note this. Unless anybody's got some queries and questions for the officer. No. Okay. We're moving therefore on to item 14 on the agenda. This is the annual governance statement AGS of 2023-2024 and the annual review of the local code of governance. Mr. Stannard.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the pre-audited draft annual governance statement before you tonight, and this has been produced as a product of an extensive assurance gathering process as detailed in paragraph 9 on page 226. The AGS was included in the draft statement of accounts, which was made available for the statutory public inspection period, which commenced on the 1st of June 24 and lasted for 6 weeks. 2 members of the public, including Mr. McKinstry, have made comments regarding the AGS, and these comments have been considered amongst other internal review comments, resulting in this draft tonight. The draft annual governance statement is based on the collective evidence-based judgment of the Council's senior staff and leadership group. Whilst the content is a matter of judgment, Grant Thornton, the external auditor, consider the annual governance statement in context of their own VFM opinion and audit of the statement of accounts, which the AGS is a component. The pre-audited version of the AGS can be changed by the council up to the point the external auditor signs off the statement of accounts. Indeed, we have a legal duty to inform the auditor that we have positively considered the need to amend or update before he signs those accounts off. If that is required, the annual governance statement will return to this committee for awareness and approval. A couple of reminders. The annual governance statement should demonstrate the council is self-aware of matters where governance weakness exists or where improvements can be made. This is distinct from issues or risks that may exist but are not caused or impact governance. For example, something could be a significant risk but have limited governance implications. This draft annual governance statement contains 4 significant governance issues, and they're shown at paragraph 20 on page 236, and further at paragraph 23 on page 237. This shows the issues considered where we acknowledge governance weaknesses may exist, but fall below the significant threshold of the annual governance statement. Moving to the review of the local code of governance on page 243 onwards, this is a summary of how the council demonstrates good governance principles, linking back to the international framework circle diagram you see on page 246, and it utilises the same colour coding across the principles. The local code maps the various sources of governance in place at BCP Council to achieve those overall 7 principles of good governance. This document is in practice an evolving document and is a current snapshot of the governance in place. Thank you, Chair.
You hear that? Councillor Mike Cox has given me a written comment or statement on the annual governance statement. I'll read it out. It's important to note the robustness of this statement when compared to that produced in 2021, 2022, which in my opinion was incomplete, as evidenced by the subsequent government best value notice and the external auditor's subsequent value for money opinion, which contained a red judgment on governance. While significant progress has been made on the best value notice and the mandatory training weaknesses, it needs to be accepted that the ongoing problems with SEND/DSG are significantly out of our control, and the timelessness of the audits is an industry-wide issue common to all local authorities. That's the end of Councillor Cox's statement. So I open up to questions or statements from the committee if anybody wants to raise anything. Got no indications from anybody. I think in what we've got set out here is we actually have to. Councillor Carley, sorry. Over to you, Councillor Carley.
Sorry, I'm just a bit slow at putting my hand up. Just a quick question on the best value notice. One of the ongoing activities remaining is governance review of subsidiary companies. Wondering if you could briefly update us on that.
Monitoring Officer.
Thank you, Chair. The legal services have been working with various officers across the council, reviewing the the arm's length companies that the council does have, and ensuring that appropriate governance arrangements are in place, which includes either the closing of some companies which have zero function left for purposes of the council, and also looking at identifying good governance arrangements, such as a link officer who is within the council environment but is the point of contact for the arm's length company to ensure that they're delivering against the council's corporate requirements, the corporate strategy, the plans and the performance issues. In addition to that, on a more strategic footprint, following on from Audit Committee's decisions in January of this year, substantial codes have been written which will be presented to a future meeting of the Constitution Working Group. One is in respect of the council's future plans to manage the companies, which is in accordance with the January 2024 report around managing shareholder activity. The second one is a protocol on guidance, which is advice which will be included in the Constitution to all of those appointed to an outside body. For example, it may be an arm's length company, it may be a trust, it may be a charity, in terms of the ethics around that appointment. So where does your point of conflict lie? What do you do if you've got a concern? Who to approach? What is the role and what is the legal foundation for being appointed to that? So, for example, some members, for example, may be appointed to a trust or charity, asked to sign various forms. You need a lot of legal advice around that because it may be unlimited liability and a personal risk. So we felt it's appropriate, whilst we're doing the review, to have an ethics code that we can incorporate into our constitution to offer that more global assistance. Once those two documents have been through the Constitution Working Group, which I note, Councillor Connolly, you chair, it will be then the discretion of whether those come to the Audit Committee for onward reference to Council for inclusion. We also have to consult with Cabinet as well, because shareholder functions are a reserved matter for Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Connolly, is that answers your queries?
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got a recommendation here which we actually have to approve as opposed to note. So the pre-audited annual governance statement 23-24 is approved, and B, the annual update of the local code governance is approved. So if somebody could propose it, Councillor Tarley, and ask Councillor Waite to second it. So perhaps we just for the record have a show of hands on that one, because we actually have to approve it. It's unanimous. Okay, thank you very much on that one. Item 15. Right, yes. Audit and Governance Committee Annual Report for 2023-2024. Mr. Stannard.
Thanks, Chair. So this is a new report for BCP Council for 23-24, and is in response to evolving best practice. Local authority audit committees are now recommended to approve an annual report on their own annual activity and report this to council to give council assurance the committee is achieving its core principles and delivering on its terms of reference. This first BCP council version follows best practice recommendations in terms of content and style and includes a forward from the chair. Other core elements include the membership and attendance summary. That's shown at 2.6 on page 264. Reference is made at 2.11 to the onboarding of Lindy and Sam as independent members from October 23. Section 3 of the report at page 267 onwards reconciles the terms of reference to the actual reports received and reviewed by this committee. The report also includes commentary on the following core purposes of the committee, where you exercise oversight, namely the statement of accounts, the external audit, internal audit, risk management, and corporate governance. Finally, Chair, the report looks forward to 24-25 and sets out some of the requested assurance reports in addition to business as usual. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. I've just got one query, which is a bit of housekeeping. Obviously, we've had a change this evening, or announced this evening, about the membership of the committee. This document, which is appended here, is that fixed in tablets of stone, or can it be updated before the council meeting with the addition of Councillor Slade?
It's fixed in stone, Chair, because it's the 23-24 look back.
Thank you for that explanation. Thank you very much. Right. Any comments or queries or questions on this? I think, well, I attended a conference of other chairs of audit and governance committees earlier this year, and this is one of the things that was asked of the chairs. Does your council do it? I said no. Others said they did do it. I would say we were in the majority of the councils who didn't do it, but obviously it was recommended that it's something, and it comes from CIFRA, and you'll have to explain what those initials stand for, that we should be doing. So I think this is something excellent that we should be doing, and it is something that's recommended. And I think, obviously, like with the previous item, we should take a formal vote on it because it will be going to full council. But can you explain what those initials stand for? Because they're quite often read out, but what does it mean?
It was CIFRA, did you say, Chair? Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy.
And does that cover the whole of the UK or just England and Wales?
Chair, just to highlight, CIFRA is a worldwide organisation. It has branches overseas, besides within the United Kingdom.
Thank you for that explanation. Councillor Clare-Wait.
It's a question about, I know the role of the audit committee can vary in local authorities, and I may not use the correct terminology, so I'm not all that sort of familiar with it, but I know that you have, you know, a cabinet-based system or you have a committee-based system, and my understanding is that the audit committee might have a larger role in the committee-based system. So was it, no, Janie's shaking her head. No, I was just wondering if it was those people who'd sort of put their hands up to say that we sort of self-report on our audit committee, because I just think, I don't know, like, is this really necessary, and how much like officer time did it take? Is this really a worthwhile thing? Do we want to commit to doing it year after year?
Monitoring Officer Jenny.
Chair, the role of the audit committee is the same, whether we have a strong leader model, which is the cabinet and a scrutiny function, or whether you have a committee function or a hybrid style of management. So the role of audit committee is always wide ranging. It's always has a significant role in the governance of the council, and in any form of future authority, style of authority, for example, devolution, an audit committee is a regulatory, it's a required mandatory committee of any other form of governance platform that may be debated politically in the future. it is extremely good practice to do an annual report, because this report is advising council on the corporate governance health of the organisation. There's a significant amount of information that comes through this council, through this committee, and it's important to give all councillors that full oversight and also the assurance as well. It's also a key indicator, in my experience, for external audit, who use this as one of the documents about how the council presents its governance framework going forward. If I may just add as well, Chair, the Standards Committee is also currently considering itself producing an annual report based on the ethical governance framework of the council. So again, that document would then sit alongside this and help contribute towards evidence base for the annual governance statement.
Okay, thank you for that. And this document, if we agree to recommend to full council for its presentation, is it something that will then just be attached to the minutes, or is it something that potentially could be accessed by the public on our website?
Chair, if I may, this is a public document. It will be a standalone item on a council agenda. It will be anticipated that you may want to present it to full council with the support of Councillor Connolly. I'm giving that retrospective look back. So it is absolutely a public document. It goes as part of it will feed into the evidence base of the annual governance statement, the development of the local code of corporate governance as well. So it's a key feature on how we monitor our governance health as an organisation going forward. The members of the public will be entitled to ask questions on this as well at full council. And it is for noting of full council as well, and for you to receive their observations in terms of issues that you may want to report back to this committee, you may want to report to internal audit as part of your ongoing work on reviewing the governance of the council.
Okay, thanks for that guidance and assistance. Councillor Tarling.
I suggest one of my electors has just left the room, but we might want to give him a leather-bound copy of this committee report as a thank you for his contributions.
Well, it will be available online. Yeah, so can we? Sorry, Councillor Beasley.
Thank you very much. Well, I welcome this report, and given that SIP for Best Practice recommends taking this approach, a little along the lines of the independent members. As your immediate predecessor, I was working on both of these up to that point, and I therefore fully support what it is that's coming forward here this evening. And I'm glad that we've been able to enact in both those areas. Indeed, in terms of full council, one of the other areas which might want to be considered was that I was looking for something a little more regular than annually in terms of audit and governance's profile, in particular at full council, reporting back on significant issues, because I do think that unless audit and governance makes a bit of a noise about itself, then it sort of goes a little bit below the waterline as far as anybody else's recognition of it's concerned. Possibly that's due to the level of excitement that it engenders across members generally, I don't know. But I do think that it is something, not for a decision tonight, but just worthy of thinking about, and not just for the sake of doing it, when there is something of significance. But certainly, Chairman, I welcome, as I did with the independent members, bringing forward this report, and it's only a pity we couldn't have done it sooner, really. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, thank you for your contribution. It's something that we can note and consider. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I remember when I first came to this committee, one of the things that came up in our discussions was about how do we rebuild trust with residents in the spite of some of the issues that we'd had to look into before. And I think having such an open and transparent report, having that available to people, I think is a really good step forward in demonstrating that we've heard residents express concerns about governance and we're taking them seriously, and this is how we demonstrate it. So I think it's really good to help us get those messages out for people to be reassured that we are a committee, that we're operating at a robust level, and that we do challenge and fully investigate things. So I really welcome it as well.
So putting some words in your mouth, you're prepared to make the recommendation as set out in the agenda. Oh, Councillor Connolly.
Oh, I was just going to reiterate that. Yeah, I think it's a very positive step forward. I was just curious how you thought the presentation to councils would go. I would imagine that the speech from Councillor Andrews might be to sort of highlight some of the key issues that we looked at over the course of the year. And it might be a good way for other councillors to see how what we do fits in with work going on in other committees and in that respect. And I wonder if it might also prompt a discussion from councillors as to other items that they think we should look at in the coming year. So just interested in if anyone had any thoughts on how you imagine those council debates might go.
Excellent suggestions. That's something that we could raise with councillors, not necessarily at the meeting, but even prior to it. Councillor Beasley.
Well, thank you, Chairman, for letting me come back. One of the things that I introduced and which we followed through on are the extra meetings, the additional meetings. And I think what we've done in the past when we introduced those was about going out to members of the committee first to see if there are any substantive items that could perhaps be fitted into the forward plan. And then going out to all members, which I think I did on a sort of no, probably twice a year, actually, I do, about every 6 months, to see if there are any issues coming forward from members of the council generally, which then got refined down to something that we could manage within our own remit. There weren't very many, it's fair to say. Most of those additional items came from members of the committee, not surprisingly, but it is something I think that periodically needs to go out to all members of the council, and it probably is all right to do it just annually, given that the response in the past hasn't been that great.
I think that's quite right, and I think now that the new intake of councillors have got their legs well and truly under the table in terms of how the council works and operates, it may be that they can reflect on what they've learnt or the challenges they've experienced to actually now make some constructive suggestions as to what we can consider as a committee. So thank you for that suggestion. So I've got a proposal from Councillor Armstrong that we accept the recommendation set out. We've got a seconder there, and as it's going to go to full council, if you'll indicate that we support that, that's fantastic. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And moving on to the last item on the agenda, item 16, is the forward plan for 2024-2025. And the forward plan in terms of where it is, I think it's page 279, and also it continues over onto page 280. Don't miss the bits on page 280. Read it all. Well, it particularly links into our next meeting on the 5th of September, where you think, well, there's not much on the agenda, but actually it's this item overleaf. So, Mr. Stannard.
Thanks, Chair. I didn't really want to say anything. I just, maybe point out Councillor Tarling's comment earlier about procurement. That's the second item on the next core non-core meeting in September. So that's where procurement will go into a bit of deeper dive on the council's financial regs currently, but then also talk about the prospective changes in how it might impact.
And something that was touched upon earlier in the evening about the primary legislation that's got to come through for this abbreviated accounts, that, if you've got some news, even happens on the 5th of September in the morning about what's going on with that, if you can give us some verbal updates in September and October as to what's happening with that legislation, because I would like to know. I think the committee would like to know.
Yeah, on that one, Chair, we've been quite cautious. If you go right to the top of Appendix A, you'll see that we sort of put in a merge cell where the external auditor could come at any time in any meeting to try, depending on when that legislation might come out or when there's an update to give. So
you've taken that to March 2025.
Yeah.
Okay, might take that long. Okay, so any comments or queries? It's just Councillor Emily.
Just very briefly, we talked a little bit last time about the children's services risk in the corporate risk register being really quite a big risk with lots of work streams within that. So suggested that the October meeting we asked some relevant officers from Children's Services to be able to answer any questions if we did a sort of mini deep dive in that meeting, if other councillors and committee agree.
Mr. Stanley, is that something that you could possibly arrange?
Fiona's still on. I think I'll presumably Councillor Connolly, that's in the risk management paper. So I'll liaise with Fiona and I'm sure she could facilitate that.
Yep.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Richards.
Can I just caution a little bit with regards to timing? Because I know that Children's Services will be working in that period to full ILAC. So I just don't want to, potentially commit resources that actually are needed elsewhere during that period. So
I fully understand that.
Fiona can take it away. We can think about time.
Happy to take that away.
Don't want to take their attention away from dealing with the problems in front of them. Yeah. Okay, so it's just to note that forward plan, ladies and gentlemen, so that's noted. And there's no other items on the agenda. So I would now close the meeting at 5 minutes to 9. Thank you for listening online and good evening to you. Thank you.